Hey guys, tonight we drift into the Black Sea air of Rise, a coastal town where the salt mixes with the smell of tea leaves drying in family kitchens. Here, a boy learns that in Turkey, reputation can be worth more than gold, and a quick wit can cut deeper than any blade. He's wiry, restless, eyes always scanning for the next move. The streets are narrow, the neighbors know everything, and every glance feels like a test. You probably won't survive this place without either bending or breaking the rules, and young Sedat decides early that bending is for other people. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments, so I know where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rise of the late 1970s and early 80s is caught between tradition and political turbulence. The tea plantations provide work, but they can't shelter the youth from the waves of ideology sweeping across Turkey. Nationalists, leftists, and Islamists fight for space in the same streets, their arguments spilling out of coffee houses and onto the cobblestones. In this charged environment, Sedat's sharp tongue and instinct for reading people start to attract attention. He's the kind of boy who can quiet a group with a single remark or provoke one with a smirk. His father, a stern man of few words, works with quiet discipline, and his mother keeps the household with a mix of tenderness and steel. From them, he learns two essential lessons: loyalty to your own and the power of appearing unshaken. It's not that he's fearless. He just knows fear is something best hidden from the crowd. School is never enough to keep him occupied. He spends his afternoons by the docks, watching fishermen unload their catch, listening to older boys brag about fights, prison stints, and the politics of Istanbul they barely understand. He learns that alliances are currency. Buy someone tea, defend them in an argument, and you've earned a favor. But let someone insult you without reply, and the whole street will remember. By his teenage years, he's already a presence. He's not yet the man who will stride across political rallies or command online audiences of millions, but the outlines are there. Friends recall that he had a way of making trouble seem like adventure, convincing others to join in stunts that skirt the law without quite crossing it. Still, in a place like Rise, it doesn't take much for a prank to tip into a feud, and for a feud to become something more dangerous. The political climate makes it worse. Clashes between rival youth groups sometimes leave bodies on the pavement. Sedat watches, listens, and learns which symbols to respect, which colors to wear, and which slogans will open doors or close them forever. He's drawn to the nationalist side, partly by instinct, partly because the men in that camp seem to have a code. They move with confidence, defend each other fiercely, and seem to carry both the fear and admiration of the town. One evening, after a scuffle near the tea market, an older nationalist leans in close to him and says, "If you're going to stand with us, you'd better stand straight. No half measures." Sedat takes it as a challenge. Soon, his afternoons by the docks turn into evenings in dimly lit coffee houses, where talk of defending the nation blends with plans for the next rally or the next fight. These early days are about testing limits, learning who he can trust, and finding out just how far charm can carry him before force becomes necessary. The boy from Rise is stepping into a larger game, and he's starting to like the stakes. Istanbul in the late 1980s is a city of contradictions. Its streets buzzing with commerce, its walls covered with political slogans, its alleys still haunted by the echoes of coups and unrest. Sedat arrives here as a young man with a country boy's eyes and a city man's hunger. The scent of roasted chestnuts mixes with diesel fumes, and every district feels like a kingdom with its own ruler, its own laws. The campus gates of his chosen university stand like the threshold to a new arena. In the lecture halls, professors talk of economics, history, and law. But outside those walls, the real curriculum unfolds in a different dialect. Student groups align themselves with political factions, their meetings punctuated by chants, arguments, and sometimes flying fists. Sedat, always alert to the power of presence, knows he must choose his company carefully. He gravitates toward the nationalist student associations, not only because their rhetoric resonates with the ideals he's already flirting with, but because their members seem organized, disciplined, and able to make trouble disappear. Istanbul's campuses in this era are breeding grounds for the political class of tomorrow, but they're also training camps for street-level operators. There's a constant push and pull between lectures and loyalty, between academic debates and the more immediate politics of the pavement. Sedat finds himself increasingly invested in the latter. His sharp memory and natural charisma make him an asset during heated discussions, and his willingness to stand at the front during demonstrations earns him quiet nods from older activists. Nights in the city are another kind of education. He learns which tea gardens are neutral ground, which coffee houses lean nationalist, and which districts to avoid unless you're looking for a fight. He also learns that a quick apology can be more strategic than a stubborn stand, though he rarely uses one unless it serves a purpose. There's a particular evening that marks a shift. A rally near Taksim turns chaotic when a rival group storms in, shouting slogans and waving banners. The air fills with the sting of tear gas, and most scatter. Sedat doesn't. He stays, steady among the chaos, helping an older member carry their injured friend to safety. By the end of the night, word spreads. The boy from Rise didn't just hold his ground, he helped hold the line. The friendships forged in those days are more than social bonds, they're political capital. Many of these students will one day hold positions in local councils, party offices, or influential business circles. Sedat understands that what's shared now, cups of tea, bruised knuckles, whispered plans, might become debts owed later. He keeps one foot in the official world, enough to pass his courses and keep his family's pride intact. But the other foot is already in a different realm entirely. It's a realm where loyalty is earned in action, where identity is shaped in confrontation, and where a man's reputation can travel faster than any rumor. It's during these years that his voice takes on the cadence he'll later use to rally crowds and, decades down the line, address millions online. He speaks with the calm of someone who knows his words will be repeated, with the conviction of a man who already believes he is part of a much larger story. By the time graduation approaches, Sedat has more than a diploma in hand. He has a network, a reputation, and a growing understanding that in Turkey, the real corridors of power are not always inside government buildings. They run through the tea gardens, back rooms, and narrow streets where men shake hands and make promises no law will ever record. The Grey Wolves initiation is not something advertised in pamphlets or posted on bulletin boards. It happens in whispers, in the back rooms of coffee houses where the walls are yellowed from decades of cigarette smoke, or in dim apartments where curtains are drawn tight even at midday. By the time Sedat is invited in, he has already been circling their orbit for years, sharing tea with their senior members, helping organize campus rallies, and proving time and again that he can keep his mouth shut when it matters most. The Grey Wolves, or Bozkurtler, are not just a club. They are a brotherhood with its own mythos. Their identity blends Turkish nationalism, street discipline, and the sense of being a vanguard against forces they believe threaten the nation. Many people still think that joining them is simply about shouting slogans at rallies, but the reality is far more structured. Prospective members are watched closely long before they are approached. Loyalty is measured in small ways: showing up when called, standing in the cold for hours without complaint, defending another member without hesitation. Sedat's initiation begins not with a grand ceremony, but with a test. One night, he is told to meet at a quiet intersection in a conservative district of Istanbul. A car arrives, the back door opens, and a familiar face gestures for him to get in. They drive in silence, winding through streets until they reach a small house on the edge of the city. Inside, the air smells faintly of strong tea and tobacco. 3 older men sit around a table. The questions come slowly, each one layered with implication. Why do you want to stand with us? What will you do if your loyalty is questioned? Who comes first? Your family or your brothers here? Sedat answers with measured calm, knowing each word will be weighed. After the talk, there is a moment of quiet. One of the men reaches into his pocket and places a silver wolf's head pin on the table. If you wear this, it's not decoration, it's a promise. Sedat takes it without hesitation. The room does not erupt in cheers. There is no need. The pin's weight in his palm is all the ceremony required. From that day forward, life moves differently. Meetings are more frequent, the tasks more serious. Sometimes it's delivering a message to another district. Sometimes it's standing guard outside a meeting place while senior members talk politics inside. He learns the subtle language of hand signs, the layered meanings in their slogans, the way a single nod can send half a dozen men moving as one. The Grey Wolves also provide something Sedat craves, a sense of belonging that is both ideological and personal. In their ranks, his sharp mind and natural authority are not just noticed, they are cultivated. Older members tell him stories of their own initiations, of fights fought in the 1970s when Turkey seemed on the brink of collapse. These stories are equal parts warning and inspiration. One winter night, during a march through a neighborhood where tensions run high, a bottle shatters against a wall nearby. Sedat feels the rush of adrenaline, but he stays in formation, eyes forward. Later, a senior quietly tells him, "You didn't flinch. That's worth more than 100 speeches." In this brotherhood, every action is a signal. To hesitate is to invite doubt. To act decisively is to build unshakable trust. Sedat understands this intuitively, and he leans into it. By the end of his first year as a Grey Wolf, he is no longer just the boy from Rise or the student activist from Istanbul. He is part of an organization whose reach extends far beyond the streets, into politics, business, and the quiet corners where real decisions are made. Climbing the ultranationalist ladder is not a straight path. It's a maze of loyalties, rivalries, and opportunities that can vanish as quickly as they appear. For Sedat, the Grey Wolves provide the foundation, but ambition pushes him to operate beyond the role of a disciplined foot soldier. Istanbul in the 1990s and early 2000s is a place where street influence can translate into political capital, and Sedat understands that better than most. His first step upward comes from an unlikely source: mediation. A dispute breaks out between 2 neighborhood factions, both nationalist-leaning, but each convinced the other has overstepped in matters of territory and respect. Instead of letting fists and knives decide, Sedat steps in, arranging a quiet meeting in a neutral cafe. He speaks not like a youth seeking approval, but like a man accustomed to being heard. Both sides leave with their pride intact and a truce in place. Word spreads that he can settle problems without spilling blood, and that kind of skill is rare enough to draw attention from higher up. From then on, his presence at district meetings is more than symbolic. He is asked to speak at small gatherings, not just about nationalist ideals, but about unity, discipline, and the importance of keeping internal disputes out of public view. The older hands nod in approval. They know that power isn't just about muscle. It's about control. This is also when Sedat starts cultivating a persona. The way he dresses, always sharp, even when the meeting is informal, signals seriousness. His manner of speaking, calm but edged with certainty, makes him sound like a man already accustomed to command. In a movement where passion can often spill over into recklessness, his ability to remain composed becomes a defining trait. Opportunities come from the political sphere as well. Some nationalist politicians, eager to maintain strong ties with the Grey Wolves, notice the young man who can draw respect without shouting. They invite him to assist in organizing security for rallies, or to quietly manage situations where opposition groups might cause trouble. This is where Sedat begins to understand the porous border between politics and the street. The handshake of a politician can be as binding as the oath of a brotherhood, sometimes more so because it carries resources and legal cover. Of course, the climb is not without challenges. Rival figures within the movement resent his rise, whispering that he's too young, too polished, not hardened enough by the years of street fighting that forged their reputations. Sedat doesn't respond directly. Instead, he doubles down on results, pulling off successful events, brokering quiet agreements, and expanding his network into business circles sympathetic to nationalist causes. One pivotal moment comes during a regional gathering in Ankara. Delegates from across Turkey attend, each representing their local chapter. When a heated argument threatens to derail the meeting, Sedat steps in with a short, measured speech that reframes the issue and cools tempers. It's not flashy, but it's effective. Later, an influential elder pulls him aside and says, "You have the patience of a chess player. That's how you win in this game. Climbing the ladder isn't about forcing the door open. It's about making the people inside believe you already belong there." By the early 2000s, Sedat is no longer just another name on the roster. He's a fixer, a mediator, and a rising figure whose word carries weight well beyond his official rank. The boy who once stood on the edges of rallies is now shaping them, and the city is starting to take notice. The first political patron comes into Sedat's life not through a grand introduction, but through a moment of necessity. In the early 2000s, a nationalist rally in Istanbul is threatened by sudden bureaucratic hurdles, permits delayed, police presence unusually heavy, whispers of a ban. The organizers panic, but Sedat knows a man who knows a man, and before the day is over, the rally goes ahead as planned. Somewhere in the shadows of that victory, a senior politician takes note. The man is a seasoned nationalist parliamentarian with a reputation for surviving multiple political shifts without losing his seat. His handshake is firm, his smile calculated, and his eyes constantly measuring the worth of the person in front of him. In Sedat, he sees a rare combination: street credibility, nationalist alignment, and the polish to operate in formal settings. In Sedat's world, this kind of patronage is gold, offering protection, legitimacy, and access to a different tier of influence. Their relationship begins with small tasks. The politician calls when there's a rally in need of disciplined security, or when a certain neighborhood needs persuading to turn out for a vote. Sedat delivers, every time, with quiet efficiency. In return, the politician smooths over legal troubles, whispers Sedat's name into the right ears, and ensures that when the police make their rounds, certain doors are never knocked on. This patron also introduces Sedat to the art of discretion. In politics, the man explains, power often comes not from being seen everywhere, but from being seen exactly where it matters, and only by the right people. Sedat learns when to appear at public events and when to stay in the background, letting others take the credit while he cements his influence in private. One telling moment comes when Sedat is invited to a closed-door dinner in Ankara. Around the table sit businessmen, local officials, and party operatives. The conversation moves seamlessly from national policy to real estate investments, from ideological rhetoric to the allocation of city contracts. Sedat says little, but he observes everything. He understands that this is the machinery behind the speeches and rallies, the quiet deals that bind politics to profit. The patron also teaches him about timing. In our world, the man says one evening over tea, you don't take every opportunity you're offered. You wait for the ones that move you forward without moving you into someone else's sights. Sedat takes this to heart, avoiding unnecessary risks while positioning himself where the benefits outweigh the exposure. Of course, such relationships are never without strings. Sedat is expected to deliver when called upon, to maintain loyalty even when political winds shift. But in return, he gains something rare, the ability to operate in both the street and political arenas without being fully owned by either. This dual footing will become the foundation of his later career. The streets respect him because he's proven himself there. Politicians respect him because he can influence the streets without turning them into a riot. And both sides know that if Sedat gives his word, he intends to keep it. By the mid-2000s, his name is circulating in places far from the coffee houses where he started. He is no longer just the young gray wolf with a talent for mediation. He is becoming a trusted bridge between two worlds that often pretend they have nothing in common, even as they trade favors in the dark, and turf consolidation is never officially announced. There's no ribbon cutting, no signed declaration, just a slow rearranging of loyalties and boundaries until one man's word carries across neighborhoods that once answered to different voices. By the late 2000s, Sedat has begun weaving together small, fractious, nationalist-leaning crews into something resembling a single network, and he does it without the public brawls that used to mark such transitions. His method is patient. He starts with respect calls, visiting local figures in their own spaces, drinking their tea, listening more than he talks. He acknowledges their reputations, assures them he isn't here to replace them, only to coordinate for the good of the cause. This is the kind of language that opens doors. In truth, coordination is a polite way of saying alignment, and alignment over time means authority. Some of these local crews are more business-minded than ideological. They control parking lots, nightclubs, security services, or the unspoken rules of certain markets. Sedat doesn't demand they fly his flag. He simply offers protection, political cover, and access to his network in exchange for mutual loyalty. It's an offer that's difficult to refuse in a city where legal and illegal often share the same street corner. Occasionally, there's resistance. A younger leader in one district, emboldened by a small but loyal following, refuses Sedat's overtures. Rather than confront him directly, Sedat works around him, building ties with the older men who control the supply chains feeding that district's businesses. Within months, the younger man finds himself isolated, his influence evaporating without a single public challenge. The message spreads. In Sedat's world, you can be pushed aside without ever being touched. The political connections forged in earlier years also play a role. City permits, police visits, and inspection schedules seem to bend in his favor. Places aligned with his network run smoothly, while those that hold out find themselves tangled in red tape or sudden random checks. No one says Sedat is behind it, but everyone knows. This consolidation is not just about profit or even political leverage. It's about predictability. The fewer disputes between factions, the more control he can maintain over outcomes. He frames it as a service. Fewer fights mean less police attention, which means everyone's operations run cleaner and quieter. One evening, in a rooftop meeting overlooking the Bosphorus, Sedat explains his philosophy to a group of mid-level operators. A city like this is an orchestra. Too many people trying to play their own tune makes noise. One conductor, though. That's when you get music. They laugh, but the metaphor sticks. Within a year, the network he oversees hums with efficiency, and his word settles disputes before they escalate. The transformation doesn't make headlines. There's nothing sensational to photograph. But in the circles that matter, people understand that the nationalist street in Istanbul now speaks with one voice more often than not. That voice belongs to Sedat. Charity as a shield is an old trick in Turkish politics and street life, but Sedat elevates it into an art form. By the early 2010s, his name is attached to food drives in poor districts, scholarships for struggling students, and even aid shipments to Turkish communities abroad. Each public gesture reinforces an image carefully curated to outshine the whispers of his street connections. He knows the optics, photographs of him handing out blankets in the winter, visiting schools with neatly stacked books, standing beside clerics during Ramadan iftar dinners. These images travel fast in local newspapers and on television, framing him not just as a nationalist figure, but as a benefactor. The beauty of it is that the charity is real. People genuinely receive help, but it also buys loyalty in places money alone could never reach. In neighborhoods where his network operates quietly in the background, these acts serve as both goodwill and insurance. A shopkeeper whose rent is paid for a month will think twice before cooperating with rivals. A family whose child receives a scholarship is unlikely to answer awkward questions from outsiders. Gratitude becomes a silent wall of protection. One of his most notable moves is organizing aid for disaster-stricken regions. After a major earthquake, Sedat arrives not in a convoy of black cars, but in a battered truck filled with food and blankets. He helps unload the supplies himself, cameras catching the sweat on his shirt and the dirt on his hands. The footage plays on national news that night, and by morning, people are calling him Sedat Abi, Big Brother Sedat, a title that carries both affection and respect. The charities also give him an excuse to travel openly, meeting contacts under the cover of humanitarian work. A visit to deliver aid in the Balkans doubles as a chance to strengthen ties with sympathetic business owners. A scholarship award ceremony in central Anatolia allows for quiet conversations with local political operatives. There are critics, of course. Some say the charity is nothing but a smokescreen, a way to launder his reputation. Sedat doesn't waste time rebutting them in public. Instead, he doubles the size of his next project, making the criticism seem petty in comparison. Many people still think that this generosity is entirely strategic. But does it matter to the family whose table is full for the first time in months? So what do you think? What matters to Sedat is the layering of his image. To the public, he's a benefactor with a nationalist heart. To his network, he's a man who can move goods, people, and influence across borders without drawing undue heat. And to politicians, he's a figure whose popularity at the street level makes him a valuable ally during campaign season. By the time his charity brand is fully established, Sedat has woven a protective web around himself, one made not just of loyal men in leather jackets, but of school children who wave when they see him, mothers who bless his name, and journalists who know a feel-good story when they see one. The first major crackdown comes without warning. It is early morning in Istanbul when the sound of boots on stairwells and the clatter of metal gates echo through the narrow streets. Police move in on multiple addresses linked to nationalist groups, their warrants as much about sending a message as making arrests. Sedat wakes to a call from one of his lieutenants, short, tense, and to the point. They're coming. Years of building networks have taught him that the most important skill in moments like this is not strength, but speed. Within minutes, he's dressed, phone switched to a clean number, and on his way to a safe apartment 2 districts away. The police raid his known residence an hour later, finding nothing but empty teacups and the faint smell of cologne. This sweep is broader than any he's seen before. Friends and associates are detained, some on legitimate charges, others for the crime of being in the wrong room with the wrong people. The newspapers run bold headlines about organized crime and political violence, splashing grainy photographs of men in handcuffs across their front pages. Sedat's name is not printed, but insiders know he's one of the intended targets. For a few weeks, the streets feel different. Men who used to walk tall keep their heads down. Cafes once filled with political talk grow quiet, the air thick with suspicion. Sedat spends this time in the background, communicating through trusted intermediaries, keeping operations running without drawing attention. It's a test of his network's resilience, and it passes. The police can disrupt, but they cannot dismantle what they cannot see. Still, the crackdown leaves a mark. He loses a few minor players to arrests and a couple more to fear. They quietly fade away, moving to other cities or slipping into legitimate work. Sedat doesn't chase them. In his world, not everyone is built for long games under pressure. What he gains, however, is sharper instinct. He begins to structure his operations with more layers of separation, never letting the same people handle the same tasks twice in a row. He uses the charity networks more actively as cover, moving meetings to distribution centers or aid offices where police attention looks like harassment rather than justice. There is also a psychological shift. Being hunted, even briefly, changes the way he sees the city. Every unmarked van becomes a question, every unfamiliar face in a cafe a potential tale. Instead of making him paranoid, it sharpens his focus. He learns to vanish into the noise of Istanbul, moving at peak traffic, blending into crowded bazaars, using public transport when the private car feels too conspicuous. Many people still think that the crackdown was purely about law enforcement, but Sedat believes it was a political warning. The timing, just ahead of a national election, and the selectiveness of the raids point to an attempt to remind certain players of their place. If that was the intention, It backfired in his case. Far from retreating, Sedat uses the experience to refine his methods, ensuring that the next time the boots come, they'll find even less. The city soon returns to its rhythm. But for Sedat, the memory of that morning is permanent. It's the day he learned that survival in his world isn't about never being targeted. It's about making yourself too difficult to catch and too costly to hold. Cyprus becomes his refuge, not because it is far, but because it is close enough to keep a hand on the pulse of Istanbul while staying out of reach. In the 2010s, northern Cyprus is a peculiar kind of sanctuary, a place where politics, business, and the shadows intermingle without drawing too much attention. For men like Sedat, it offers three crucial things: sympathetic contacts, relaxed oversight, and flight connections back to Turkey within an hour's notice. He arrives discreetly, no grand entourage, no visible show of exile. Officially, he is there for business opportunities and to explore investment in the tourism sector. Unofficially, it's a strategic pause. The crackdown in Istanbul has cooled, but its aftershocks are still felt, and some political winds have shifted against him. Cyprus allows him to breathe without disappearing completely. Northern Cyprus has long been a meeting point for Turkish businessmen, political operatives, and figures who prefer not to explain the sources of their wealth. In the bustling casinos, deals are made as easily over baccarat tables as in boardrooms. Sedat knows how to move in these circles without becoming trapped by them. He keeps his profile low, but his presence is noted, always in the right restaurants, shaking hands with the right people. Here, he strengthens cross-border links. The island's position makes it an ideal hub for certain trades, some legitimate, some less so, that connect Turkey to the Middle East and Europe. He helps facilitate introductions, settles disputes quietly, and ensures that business flows smoothly between contacts on both sides of the Mediterranean. Living abroad also offers him a new perspective. Away from Istanbul's constant grind, he can assess his alliances with fresh clarity. Some he decides to deepen, others he lets fade. This pruning is deliberate. When he returns, he wants a network that is lean, loyal, and efficient. One evening in Kyrenia, while sipping strong Turkish coffee by the harbor, a friend asks him if he misses the energy of the city. Sedat smiles and says, "You can't miss something you still hold in your hand." It's not bravado. He's kept his influence alive through steady contact, phone calls at odd hours, and carefully timed visits back to Turkey that are short enough to avoid trouble, but long enough to remind everyone he's still a presence. Many people still think that his Cyprus stay was purely about avoiding arrest. The truth is more layered. It was a tactical relocation, close enough to remain relevant, far enough to be untouchable. And for a man who understands the value of patience, it was also a test of whether his empire could run without him being in the center every day. When he finally prepares to return, it's not with fanfare, but with the quiet assurance that the ground in Istanbul is once again solid beneath his feet. Cyprus was never the destination. It was the pause between moves in a long, deliberate game. Returning to Istanbul after Cyprus feels less like coming home and more like stepping back onto a chessboard mid-game. The city hasn't changed in its essence, the same mix of honking horns, street vendors shouting prices, and the distant hum of political rallies. But some of the pieces have moved. Faces he once saw in every meeting are gone, replaced by newer operators eager to prove themselves. Sedat knows better than to rush in and reclaim ground. In his world, momentum comes from appearing as if you never left. His reappearance is carefully staged. No public speeches, no headlines, just quiet visits to old allies, brief appearances at gatherings where his presence carries weight. He walks into certain cafes like he never missed a week, and the message is clear. Whatever was said in his absence, he's here now, and nothing has slipped from his hands. The political climate is shifting again, with alliances forming and fracturing faster than before. Sedat senses opportunity in the turbulence. Politicians who once kept their distance are suddenly eager to have his endorsement whispered into the right ears. The ruling party's dominance is secure, but nationalist sentiment is being courted as a crucial ally, and Sedat is positioned exactly where both currents meet. He also renews ties with elements in the Grey Wolves, many of whom respect the fact that he weathered exile without betraying anyone. Loyalty is a currency that inflates over time. Absence, handled correctly, can make it more valuable. His charity work resumes, now with a wider scope. Events that draw crowds large enough to attract media attention, reinforcing the narrative of Sedat as a community figure first, political fixer second. One particularly symbolic moment comes when he attends a nationalist rally, not at the front, but somewhere in the middle of the crowd. Cameras catch him talking to ordinary attendees, shaking hands, laughing easily. The image goes viral in certain circles. Sedat Peker among the people, unguarded, confident. For his allies, it's proof that he's still connected to the base. For rivals, it's a warning that his return is not just to offices and back rooms, but to the street itself. Behind the scenes, he also uses this period to renegotiate terms with mid-tier players in his network. He rewards those who stayed loyal during his absence, quietly sidelines those who wavered, and brings in fresh blood, young men with ambition, but without the baggage of older grudges. It's a renewal process disguised as business as usual. Many people still think that his time away weakened him. In truth, Cyprus gave him a vantage point, and now he's back with a map of where every fault line lies. His re-entry is not a return to the same position. It's a step upward on the ladder, taken so quietly that few realize it until he's already several moves ahead. By the end of his first year back, Sedat's influence is felt in every corner that matters to him. He has retaken old ground, planted new seeds, and done it without a single headline announcing his comeback. For a man like him, that's the ideal way to return, not as a loud arrival, but as a reminder that he never truly left. The social media awakening begins almost by accident. At first, Sedat treats online platforms as an extension of his public image. Photos from charity events, short videos of nationalist holiday celebrations, the occasional statement on current affairs. But around the mid-2010s, he realizes the internet offers something the old street and political structures never could: unfiltered access to the public without intermediaries. His early uploads are cautious. A clip from a cultural festival, a speech at a university seminar, a few photographs shaking hands with local figures. These are the kinds of posts that keep him in the public's peripheral vision without inviting too much scrutiny. But slowly, he begins to experiment with a more direct voice. Short monologues filmed at his desk or in a quiet garden, addressing his audience as if they were sitting across from him over tea. The response is immediate. People share the clips not because they are polished, but because they feel personal. Sedat speaks plainly, mixing nationalist rhetoric with everyday observations, sprinkling in humor when it suits him. In a political climate where most messages are filtered through formal channels, his approach feels refreshing, dangerous to some, magnetic to others. He studies the platforms like a battlefield map: YouTube for long-form statements, Twitter for rapid commentary, Instagram for curated glimpses of his lifestyle and charitable work. Each one serves a different purpose, but all feed the same narrative. Sedat as the accessible, unfiltered figure who still commands respect. One of his first viral moments comes when he posts a response to a political controversy, a carefully measured defense of his allies, combined with a sharp critique of unnamed opponents. The clip is short, under 3 minutes, but it spreads quickly. Comment sections fill with both praise and outrage, which in the attention economy serve the same purpose. From then on, his production becomes more deliberate. Lighting, background, even the angle of the camera are chosen to make him appear calm, authoritative, and unbothered. He avoids shouting, knowing a steady voice carries more weight online than a raised one. The internet rewards authenticity, or at least the appearance of it, and Sedat understands this better than many seasoned politicians. Many people still think that his online turn was a spontaneous decision, a midlife whim to keep up with the times. But those close to him know it was a calculated move. Social media allowed him to bypass the traditional gatekeepers who could mute his influence, letting him speak directly to millions without a single editor's approval. It also becomes a tool for subtle mobilization. A post praising a local figure can boost their profile overnight. A cryptic tweet about an injustice can send supporters digging for details and flooding timelines with commentary. Sedat never explicitly instructs anyone to act, but the ripples of his words reach far. By the late 2010s, his online presence is no longer an accessory. It's a central pillar of his influence. For a man who once relied on whispers in cafes and backroom deals, the ability to command an audience with the tap of a screen marks a turning point. The street is still his ground, but the digital stage has become just as vital. Political rallies have always been a theater of power in Turkey, but for Sedat, they become more than symbolic gatherings. They are stages where his influence can be felt without ever being formally announced. By the late 2010s, his appearances at rallies are carefully planned to serve multiple purposes: energize his base, signal loyalty to allies, and remind rivals that his reach is still intact. When Sedat arrives at a rally, he rarely takes the main stage. Instead, he positions himself where cameras can catch him in conversation with key figures, or in the middle of a crowd that reacts warmly to his presence. He knows the value of being seen as one of the people, while also projecting quiet authority. A handshake here, a shared laugh there. These moments are noticed by the right watchers, even if they don't make the evening news. The rallies themselves are a blend of nationalist fervor, music, and symbolic gestures. Flags wave in tight formation. Speeches alternate between policy and patriotic poetry, and the atmosphere is charged enough to feel like a festival and a call to arms at once. Sedat moves through it with ease, knowing which circles to linger in, which cameras to avoid, and which conversations to keep private. Sometimes, his role is logistical rather than performative. He discreetly ensures that security is tight, that rival factions keep their distance, and that any signs of unrest are handled before they draw public attention. On other occasions, his influence is visible in the rally's tone, more disciplined, more coordinated, the kind of gathering that leaves a lasting impression rather than descending into chaos. Many people still think that he attends these rallies purely out of personal conviction. And while Sedat does believe in the nationalist cause he aligns with, he also understands rallies as a tool, a way to reaffirm alliances, gather intelligence, and gauge the mood of both his supporters and the broader political climate. There's a moment at one rally in Ankara that captures his approach perfectly. A sudden rain begins to fall, and while many rush for cover, Sedat stays in place, smiling, talking to the few who remain. A photographer catches the scene, the man in a soaked suit, unbothered, still engaging with those around him. The image circulates widely online, accompanied by captions about resilience and loyalty. Sedat doesn't post it himself. He doesn't need to. Behind the visible moments, the rallies also serve as quiet meeting grounds. In the hum of patriotic chants and music, short conversations can take place without arousing suspicion. A quick word in the ear of a party official, a nod toward a regional organizer, a subtle introduction between two figures who will meet later under different circumstances. These are the transactions that matter most. By maintaining a careful balance between public enthusiasm and private maneuvering, Sedat ensures that his presence at these rallies is never wasted. Each one strengthens the network, polishes the image, and keeps him embedded in the political bloodstream of the country. Confrontations with rivals are inevitable in Sedat's world, but how they unfold can define a man's reputation for years. For him, the turning point comes in the late 2010s, when tensions with a well-connected figure from another nationalist-aligned faction spill into the open. It begins with quiet provocations, snide remarks in closed meetings, veiled accusations in the press, and attempts to lure away mid-level operators from Sedat's network. At first, he ignores it. Silence, after all, can be a statement of strength. But when one of his trusted men is roughed up outside a club in Istanbul's Beyoğlu district, the message is clear. This is no longer just political maneuvering. It's personal. Sedat's response is not the dramatic street clash some expect. Instead, he arranges a chance meeting at a well-known tea house near the Golden Horn, a place neutral enough that neither side can claim home advantage. The rival arrives with two aides. Sedat comes alone, wearing the calm of someone who knows he holds the stronger position. The conversation is brief. Sedat leans in, voice low, reminding the man of certain favors he once needed, debts still unpaid, and the consequences of public escalation. He doesn't threaten in the crude sense. He simply lays out the sequence of events that would follow if the current path continues. By the end, the rival nods, offers a tight smile, and leaves. The provocations stop within days. What cements Sedat's reputation is not just that he won the standoff, but that he did it without noise. In Istanbul, people remember who can end disputes without attracting the attention of police or press. That kind of control suggests not only influence, but discipline, a commodity as valuable as muscle. Many people still think that such confrontations are decided by who has more men or more weapons. Sedat knows better. The real power lies in information, timing, and the ability to make an opponent realize he's already lost before the fight begins. This episode also strengthens his standing with political allies, who value stability over chaos. A figure who can neutralize threats without public fallout is a figure they can trust. Within his network, the story spreads in slightly different form, whispered with added details, half-true embellishments that only make him seem more formidable. From this point on, few are willing to test him directly. Rivals may still circle, but they do so cautiously, aware that a misstep might lead not to a brawl in the street, but to a quiet conversation that changes their fortunes overnight. Parliamentary friendships are the kind of alliances that can't be bought overnight. They require years of cultivated trust, moments of discreet assistance, and the patience to wait for political tides to align. By the late 2010s, Sedat's reach has extended beyond nationalist circles on the street into the wood-paneled corridors of the Turkish Grand National Assembly. The friendships start informally. A phone call to smooth over a scheduling conflict for a rally. A quiet word to ensure certain neighborhoods turn out strongly during a municipal election. In return, a parliamentary aide might warn Sedat of an upcoming police sweep, or help cut through red tape for one of his charity projects. These gestures are rarely acknowledged openly, but both sides understand their value. Over time, the connections solidify. Sedat begins to receive invitations to private dinners hosted by MPs, gatherings where business leaders, regional politicians, and influential media figures mingle. He attends not as a supplicant, but as someone whose presence is welcomed, because he brings with him a constituency of street influence that no campaign budget can fully buy. One telling example comes during a tense parliamentary vote on a policy with strong nationalist undertones. Several MPs, worried about their public image, discreetly reach out to Sedat. They ask him to signal support to his audience, to frame the bill in favorable terms during his next online appearance. Sedat agrees, without ever naming the bill directly, by posting a short video praising policies that strengthen our national unity. Within hours, comments from his followers echo the sentiment. The MPs get the boost they wanted without tying Sedat's name to the legislation. Many people still think that such ties between street figures and lawmakers are exaggerated, the stuff of conspiracy theories. Yet, in countries where politics is deeply intertwined with local loyalties, these relationships are as real as the laws on the books. Sedat's friendships in Parliament give him not only early access to information, but also a form of protection. As long as he remains useful, there will be voices willing to speak on his behalf, or remain silent when silence serves him better. These alliances also help him navigate crises. When his name surfaces in connection with a controversy, a call from the right MP to the right journalist can slow the story's momentum. When bureaucratic obstacles threaten a charity event, a parliamentary friend can clear them in a single afternoon. For Sedat, these relationships are investments. He doesn't overuse them, knowing that every favor has a cost, and that the most valuable political allies are those who feel they owe you, rather than the other way around. By keeping his asks rare and strategic, he ensures that when he does call in a favor, it carries weight. By the end of this phase, Sedat's connections span from the crowded tea gardens of nationalist districts to the guarded offices of Ankara. Few men can move between these worlds without losing credibility in either. Sedat has managed it not by changing who he is in each setting, but by making both sides believe they see the real him. Balkan connections are not just about geography. They are about shared history, cultural threads, and networks that stretch across borders without needing official paperwork. For Sedat, the Balkans become both a business corridor and a political safety net. By the late 2010s, his relationships in places like Albania, North Macedonia, and Bosnia are strong enough that he can move goods, information, and influence through them with minimal friction. The foundation for these ties is laid quietly. Charity projects in Turkish communities abroad provide him with a legitimate reason to travel, often accompanied by trusted associates. At public events, he shakes hands with community leaders and local politicians. In private, he meets businessmen who deal in everything from construction contracts to cross-border logistics. These encounters are as much about gauging loyalty as they are about making deals. The Balkans offer unique advantages. Many cities have Turkish-speaking populations with deep emotional connections to the homeland, making Sedat's nationalist rhetoric resonate instantly. At the same time, the region's complex politics and varied legal systems create space for unofficial arrangements. A shipment that might attract scrutiny in Turkey can pass quietly through a Balkan port before heading to its final destination. One memorable trip takes him to Skopje, where he attends a cultural festival celebrating Ottoman heritage. The event is full of music, dance, and ceremonial speeches, but it's in the side meetings, held in quiet hotel lounges, that real agreements are forged. Over coffee, he discusses security arrangements for a joint venture with a local figure who controls key transportation routes. Nothing is signed, nothing recorded, but both men leave knowing exactly what has been promised. Many people still think that such connections are purely about trade, but for Sedat, the Balkans also serve as an insurance policy. If the political climate in Turkey turns hostile, he has friends across the water who can provide temporary shelter, logistical support, and introductions to further allies. The relationships are maintained with careful reciprocity. When a contact in Sarajevo asks for help in arranging a charity shipment after floods devastate a rural area, Sedat ensures the trucks arrive within days. When a businessman in Tirana needs an introduction to a Turkish contractor, Sedat makes the call. Each act tightens the web of obligation and trust. By the time his Balkan network is fully mature, it operates almost as an extension of his Istanbul base. Information flows both ways. Warnings about shifting political winds, tips on profitable ventures, and updates on rivals who think they can operate abroad without being noticed. In this phase of his life, Sedat's influence is no longer bounded by national borders. The sea between Istanbul and the Balkans is not a barrier. It's a bridge, one he crosses often, always with purpose. And in the quiet moments on the ferry back to Turkey, he reflects on the fact that power, when built carefully, can travel farther than any passport will ever take you. A crackdown in Ankara is different from a police sweep in Istanbul. In the capital, the machinery of the state is closer, heavier, and more deliberate. By the late 2010s, Sedat feels its weight when a series of coordinated investigations target individuals and networks tied, however loosely, to nationalist factions. Officially, it is framed as a corruption cleanup. Unofficially, it is a recalibration, an effort to remind certain figures that the ultimate authority rests in Ankara, not on the streets or in backroom alliances. The first sign comes not in the form of a raid, but as a quiet phone call from one of his parliamentary contacts. "They're building a file," the voice says. "It's not an arrest warrant yet, but a gathering storm. Bank accounts are scrutinized, associates questioned under the guise of routine inquiries, and charity projects subjected to sudden audits." Sedat responds with the patience of someone who's played this game before. He avoids unnecessary travel to the capital, shifts sensitive meetings to safe locations in Istanbul or the Balkans, and makes sure any business that could raise eyebrows is handled at arm's length. When he does appear in Ankara, it is for high-visibility, low-risk occasions, public charity events, cultural gatherings, where his presence can be documented as entirely above board. The pressure, however, is undeniable. 2 of his mid-tier operators are detained for questioning, held just long enough to unsettle them before being released without charge. The message is clear. The state is watching. And while Sedat's network is resilient, the fact that these detentions happen in Ankara's jurisdiction gives them a sharper edge. Many people still think that such actions are meant to dismantle entire networks. Sedat reads it differently. To him, this is political pressure designed to extract concessions, to force alignment on certain issues, or to remind him that influence is tolerated only when it runs parallel to the priorities of the state. During this period, he leans heavily on his parliamentary friendships, not to make the problem disappear, but to slow its momentum. A delay here, a rescheduled inquiry there, small obstacles placed in the path of a growing investigation. Meanwhile, his charity projects in the capital take on even greater prominence, earning him public goodwill that makes any overt move against him more politically costly. There's a night in Ankara when he sits in the corner of a quiet restaurant, speaking with a journalist who has covered political scandals for decades. The man says, "They don't need to jail you to beat you. They just need to make you spend all your time defending yourself." Sedat listens, nods, and then replies, "That's why I don't defend. I keep building." By the time the crackdown subsides, Sedat has not lost ground. If anything, he has gained subtle leverage. The state may have reminded him of its reach, but he has reminded it of his resilience. And in Ankara, resilience is a language everyone understands. Exile once more, but this time the circumstances are sharper, the stakes higher. In the early 2020s, Sedat leaves Turkey under a cloud thick with speculation. Officially, there are no charges. Unofficially, the pressure is unmistakable. Meetings are harder to arrange, travel is quietly monitored, and certain political voices, once warm in public, have cooled. He knows the pattern. In his world, exile isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's the only move that keeps the game going. He chooses a destination far enough to limit Turkey's immediate reach, but close enough to maintain lines of communication. Dubai becomes the first stop, a city that thrives on privacy, money, and the comfort of powerful men who prefer to operate outside the glare of formal politics. Here, Sedat blends into a crowd of international businessmen, exiles, and transient figures whose names rarely appear in headlines. Exile strips away the comfort of walking familiar streets, but it also removes certain distractions. Sedat uses the distance to reorganize his network, speaking to lieutenants through secure channels, delegating tasks more aggressively, and testing which alliances hold when he is not physically present. The results are revealing. Some bonds prove stronger than expected. Others crumble with alarming speed. Dubai also offers new opportunities. In the luxury hotels and high-end restaurants, he meets investors and intermediaries from across the Middle East. Some are curious about Turkey's political undercurrents. Others are looking for discreet entry into its markets. Sedat listens more than he talks, but when he speaks, it's with the confidence of someone whose influence still matters back home. Many people still think that exile is a sign of weakness, the slow fade of a figure who can't return. Sedat sees it differently. Distance, he believes, can sharpen influence, especially when used to speak freely in ways that would be costly on home soil. From abroad, he can comment, hint, and reveal without the same risk of a knock at the door at dawn. Still, there's an emotional toll. Nights in Dubai are quieter, lacking the hum of Istanbul's neighborhoods or the familiar comfort of his inner circle. The skyline is impressive, but it's not his city. In these moments, Sedat leans on routine. Morning coffee by the window, calls to his family, meticulous updates from his team. Routine is the anchor in a sea that wants to drift him away from relevance. Over months, the exile evolves from reactive escape to proactive platform. Sedat begins plotting not just how to survive abroad, but how to use the position to shape narratives back home. The next phase will not be about silence. It will be about voice. And he knows exactly where that voice will be heard the loudest. Digital whistleblower. 2 words that, until the early 2020s, no one would have linked with Sedat Peker. Yet exile gives him the distance, safety, and perhaps the resolve to speak in ways he never dared while walking Istanbul's streets. From a quiet villa abroad, he begins to post videos unlike anything his audience has seen before. Not charity drives, not political endorsements, but direct, unflinching accounts of alleged corruption, backroom deals, and betrayals inside the very structures he once moved within. The first video drops without warning. It's simply titled with his name and a few cryptic words. No dramatic music, no special effects. Just Sedat seated at a desk, speaking to the camera as if to an old friend. He lays out a story that weaves together personal experience, insider knowledge, and names. Names of politicians, businessmen, and operatives. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. The steadiness of his tone makes the accusations land harder. Within hours, the clip spreads across Turkish social media. People share it in group chats, dissect it in cafes, and debate it on television panels. For some, he's a hero pulling back the curtain. For others, he's a dangerous man settling scores. Either way, the attention is electric. Encouraged by the reaction, Sedat releases more videos, each one focused on a different thread. An unsolved crime from years past, a shady contract awarded under questionable circumstances, a political figure's hidden connections. He punctuates the revelations with personal anecdotes, as if reminding viewers, I was there. I saw this. Many people still think that these whistleblower moments are entirely altruistic, an act of conscience from a man tired of the game. But those who followed him closely understand the layers. The revelations hurt certain enemies, protect certain allies, and position Sedat as both a source and a filter for information, deciding what the public should know and when. The digital stage amplifies his reach in ways the street never could. From his undisclosed location, he can bypass censors, avoid physical retaliation, and speak directly to millions. Each upload becomes an event, audiences waiting to see not just what he will say, but who he will mention next. There is risk, of course. The more he speaks, the more he narrows his margin for safety. Allies in Parliament can only shield him so much when he's publicly accusing figures tied to the state. But Sedat knows something about momentum. Once the audience is hooked, stepping back can be more dangerous than pressing forward. By the time his digital whistleblower phase is in full swing, Sedat Peker is no longer just a name whispered in political and nationalist circles. He's a trending topic, a household conversation, and for many, a symbol of how the internet can turn exile into a louder megaphone than any rally could provide. Viral revelations become his new currency. By the mid-2020s, each video Sedat uploads is anticipated like a television series finale. Viewers refreshing pages, journalists drafting headlines in advance, and political commentators bracing for the aftershocks. The format is simple, but the effect is explosive. A calm monologue, carefully chosen words, and details that only an insider could know. One of his most watched videos starts with an almost casual tone, discussing the importance of loyalty and trust. Then, without raising his voice, Sedat names a well-known figure in the ruling party, tying them to a decades-old incident that had never been fully explained in public. He backs it with small but telling details, locations, dates, even the brand of tea served at a meeting. Details that make denial harder without drawing a direct legal charge. Within hours, the clip floods Turkish social media. Memes appear, talk shows scramble to discuss it without crossing their own legal boundaries, and the accused figure issues a carefully worded statement that answers nothing. The public, sensing evasion, turns even more to Sedat's channel for the next installment. Many people still think that these viral revelations are chaotic bursts, spur-of-the-moment uploads from a man with nothing to lose. In reality, Sedat times them with precision. A release might coincide with a parliamentary debate, a court ruling, or a diplomatic visit, ensuring maximum visibility and disruption. His reach begins to extend beyond Turkey. Diaspora communities in Europe and the Middle East share the videos, sometimes translating them into multiple languages. Foreign journalists cite his claims, framing him as a whistleblower whose allegations reveal deeper systemic issues in Turkish politics. The attention makes it harder for his critics to dismiss him as irrelevant. After all, if he's being discussed in Berlin and London, he's clearly more than a local problem. But viral power comes with volatility. Each revelation raises the stakes, narrowing the space for retreat. Political allies who once courted his influence grow wary, worried about becoming his next subject. Rivals, both in Turkey and abroad, begin looking for ways to discredit him, combing through his past for weaknesses. Sedat seems unfazed. In interviews, he repeats a simple line: "If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything." It's part defiance, part strategy. Truth, in his telling, is a weapon that outlasts threats. By now, his audience is no longer just watching for scandal. They're watching for the performance. The pauses, the faint smile before naming a name, the way he frames a story so the audience feels like they're piecing it together themselves. In a political culture accustomed to controlled narratives, Sedat's viral revelations feel like both entertainment and insurgency, and with each upload, the legend grows. Not just of the man who once walked the streets of Istanbul with a nationalist brotherhood at his back, but of the exile who turned a camera into his most dangerous weapon. Public reaction to Sedat's revelations is a study in contrasts: adoration, skepticism, fear, and fascination blending into one volatile current. In the tea houses of Istanbul, men lean over small glasses, replaying his words, debating whether he's exposing rot or simply shifting the balance for his own ends. In university dorms, students watch his uploads in groups, pausing to argue over which parts sound like hard fact and which sound like strategic theater. The most fervent supporters treat him like a folk hero. They share his clips with captions like, "Finally, someone brave enough to speak," turning his lines into slogans. For them, Sedat embodies defiance against an untouchable elite. Every new video feels like proof that power can be challenged, even if only from afar. Others are more cautious. They note that his targets are often selective, that certain names never appear, and that the timing of his uploads aligns suspiciously well with political shifts back home. Many people still think that this is calculated self-preservation, that Sedat speaks loudly where it's safe and stays silent where the danger outweighs the gain. So, what do you think? Is this shrewdness or compromise? Then there's the undercurrent of fear. For some in his old circles, every new revelation is a moment of anxiety, wondering if they'll be mentioned next, if their past dealings will be dragged into the light. Phone calls are made, lawyers consulted, old photos scrubbed from social media. In a culture where reputation can crumble overnight, the threat of being named carries real weight. Internationally, his profile takes on a different shape. Foreign media portray him as a complex figure, part whistleblower, part power broker, part exile navigating a political minefield. Documentaries begin to float the idea of covering his story, though producers admit the legal risks make it tricky. Sedat himself seems to thrive on the unpredictability of the reaction. The applause fuels him, the skepticism sharpens his message, and the fear keeps his name relevant. When asked in an online Q&A how he feels about the mixed responses, he smiles and says, "If everyone agreed with me, I'd know I was lying." By this stage, his uploads have evolved beyond mere accusation. They are carefully woven narratives that mix confession, history, and political commentary. Viewers tune in not just to learn what happened, but to hear how Sedat will tell it. His cadence, his pauses, his ability to make even a mundane detail feel loaded, all of it keeps the audience leaning forward, waiting for the next turn in the story. And with each wave of public reaction, one thing becomes clearer. Sedat is no longer just a participant in Turkey's political drama. From exile, he has become one of its most influential narrators, shaping the way millions perceive the events unfolding back home. Government pushback comes gradually at first, like the tide creeping in, then surges all at once. Officials avoid naming Sedat directly, preferring phrases like certain individuals spreading disinformation abroad or criminal elements attempting to destabilize our unity. State-aligned media runs segments framing him as a fugitive with a personal vendetta, mixing archival footage with selective facts to blur the line between truth and propaganda. The strategy is twofold: undermine his credibility and remind the public that his past is far from spotless. Old cases are resurrected in the press, some real, others distorted, all designed to paint him as untrustworthy. Meanwhile, quieter methods work in the background. Allies still inside Turkey feel the pressure. Unexpected tax audits, stalled permits, surprise visits from inspectors. It's a reminder that Sedat's reach, while impressive, is still vulnerable to the machinery of the state. Many people still think that such pushback is purely reactive, a clumsy attempt to silence him. But Sedat knows it's also a test. The government wants to see if he can be rattled into mistakes, naming the wrong person, revealing unverifiable claims, or lashing out in ways that hurt his own credibility. Instead, he responds with calculated restraint. In one video, he smiles and says, "When a lion roars, it's not always because it's hungry. Sometimes it's because something sharp just stepped on its paw." The metaphor spreads online, interpreted as a direct jab at Ankara. He offers no clarification, letting the speculation feed itself. Behind the scenes, he shifts his communication patterns. Sensitive conversations move to encrypted channels. Information sources are cross-checked twice before going public. His uploads become even more polished. Clean lighting, crisp sound, deliberate pacing, projecting calm in contrast to the frantic tone of state counter-messaging. The pushback also has an unintended consequence. It amplifies his profile. Every government rebuttal sparks renewed curiosity among people who hadn't paid much attention before. Search traffic for his name spikes after each official statement, and his follower counts grow in tandem with state warnings to ignore these falsehoods. Sedat understands this dynamic well. In private, he tells a confidant, "If they truly wanted to bury me, they'd stop talking about me. But they can't, and that tells you everything." By the time the pushback reaches its peak, both sides are locked in a strange rhythm. He speaks, they respond, his audience grows, and the cycle repeats. It is less a battle of facts than a contest of endurance, and Sedat has built a life around enduring. Life in hiding is not as cinematic as people imagine. There are no constant high-speed chases or midnight rooftop escapes, just a steady, deliberate narrowing of one's world until every movement is calculated. For Sedat, the early months after the peak of his revelations are defined by caution. He changes residences often, sometimes every few weeks, rotating between apartments, villas, and discreet guest houses in countries where local authorities are more concerned with tourism revenue than extradition politics. His routine becomes quiet, but precise. Mornings start with a small team of trusted aides checking the news and monitoring chatter in the channels that matter, both public social media and the private groups where whispers surface first. Meetings are limited to a short list of contacts, and even then, they are arranged in locations where Sedat can control the environment. A private room in a restaurant, a secluded corner of a hotel lobby, or a rented office floor with no neighboring tenants. Many people still think that hiding is about fear. For Sedat, it's about leverage. The less visible he is physically, the more potent his voice becomes online. A man you can't pin down acquires a certain mystique, and in political storytelling, mystique is almost as powerful as truth. The isolation has its challenges. Sedat has always thrived on face-to-face interaction, the subtle read of body language, the tone behind a word. But in hiding, much of that is replaced by encrypted calls and pre-recorded messages. He compensates by sharpening his control over what the public does see. Each rare photograph or video is deliberate, designed to suggest calm, control, and resilience, no matter the reality behind the lens. Security is an obsession. Routes are scouted before he travels. Cars are switched mid-journey. His digital footprint is monitored constantly. Devices are rotated to prevent tracking. He avoids patterns, never using the same cafe twice in a month, never walking the same street on consecutive days. Even routine grocery runs are delegated unless he wants to be seen. There are stretches when he disappears entirely from public view, letting rumors swirl. Some say he's left the region. Others claim he's been quietly negotiating a return deal. Sedat neither confirms nor denies. The ambiguity works in his favor, keeping both friends and enemies guessing. In the stillness of these days, he studies more than he speaks, watching the political tides in Turkey, tracking who rises, who falls, and where the cracks in alliances begin to show. He knows that when the moment comes to reassert himself, it must be precise, not rushed. Hiding in his mind is not retreat. It's the coiling of a spring, the quiet before a move that, when made, will seem sudden, but has been planned down to the last detail. International scrutiny intensifies as Sedat's videos continue to circulate beyond Turkey's borders. At first, it's the diaspora communities in Germany, the Netherlands, and Austria who amplify his voice, translating his statements and debating them in community forums. Soon after, foreign journalists begin taking interest, not just in the content of his claims, but in the man himself. Major European newspapers run profiles framing him as a political exile turned whistleblower. Some highlight his nationalist roots and alleged underworld ties. Others focus on the courage of speaking against entrenched power. Television news segments in the Balkans and the Middle East air subtitled clips of his monologues, often edited to fit local narratives about corruption and political opacity. The scrutiny brings both validation and risk. On one hand, Sedat's reach grows. His words now influence conversations in cities he has never visited. On the other hand, foreign coverage makes it harder for governments to ignore him without addressing the content of his revelations. The more his name appears in credible outlets abroad, the more weight his claims carry. Even if unverified, many people still think that this kind of attention is purely positive for someone in exile. Sedat knows better. International visibility draws new enemies. Lobbyists and legal teams in multiple countries begin working to counter his image, pushing their own narratives into foreign press. Certain governments quietly signal that hosting him could strain diplomatic relations with Ankara. Documentary filmmakers circle, some promising sympathetic portrayals, others fishing for sensationalism. Sedat entertains these pitches selectively, aware that a poorly handled project could distort his story beyond recognition. He's also mindful that the more polished his international image becomes, the more pressure it puts on Turkey's government to respond, something that can cut both ways. Behind closed doors, NGOs focused on press freedom and human rights begin to discuss his case, not as an endorsement of his past, but as an example of how whistleblowing can emerge from unexpected sources. This framing adds another layer to his identity. No longer just the nationalist power broker or the exile with a camera, but also a figure in broader debates about speech and accountability. Sedat moves carefully in this environment. He accepts interviews that allow him to control the pace and tone, declining those that aim for confrontation. He understands that each appearance is not just about reaching an audience. It's about shaping the lens through which his story will be told in capitals far from Ankara. The scrutiny doesn't change his core strategy, but it does remind him of one truth. In the international arena, narratives have a longer shelf life. What he says now, in exile, will follow him not just back to Turkey someday, but into any future stage he steps onto. Quiet negotiations begin long before anyone outside his closest circle notices. By the mid-2020s, Sedat understands that his position, loud enough to be heard, far enough to be safe, is sustainable only for so long. Exile has given him a platform, but it has also created a gap that can't be bridged by videos alone. To protect his legacy and his network, he starts exploring ways to bring the storm to a controlled landing. The channels are discreet. Old parliamentary allies reach out through intermediaries, lawyers, businessmen, even distant relatives, testing the waters for what a return might look like. The conversations are couched in vague terms, finding a path forward, mutual understanding, turning the page. Both sides speak as if they are not really speaking, allowing for denial if the talks become inconvenient. Many people still think that negotiations like these are simple, offer silence in exchange for safe passage. But Sedat knows the balance is more complex. He isn't just asking for the right to walk back into Turkey. He's negotiating the terms of his relevance. A quiet return under humiliating conditions would undermine everything he's built. Any deal must allow him to keep a degree of influence, even if its expression changes form. The talks move slowly, sometimes stalling for months. Political winds shift, elections approach, alliances fracture. Each change in Ankara recalibrates the value of bringing Sedat back or keeping him out. He uses these pauses to reinforce his network, ensuring that his voice, even from abroad, can still sway opinion. The message to his counterparts is subtle but clear. His absence does not mean invisibility. In some instances, The negotiations are less about a physical return and more about easing the pressure on his remaining allies in Turkey. A reduction in audits here, a pause in police visits there, small gestures that signal good faith without committing to anything final. These incremental wins keep his people loyal and his options open. There's a moment over dinner in a neutral city when an intermediary leans in and says, "They don't need you gone forever. They just need you quieter." Sedat stirs his tea and replies, "Quieter doesn't mean silent, and they know that. By the time the year turns, the shape of a possible deal begins to emerge. Not a triumphant homecoming, but a gradual re-entry, cushioned by assurances on both sides. Whether it will ever be finalized is uncertain, but Sedat has positioned himself for the one outcome he values most: returning on his own terms, or not at all. Present-day ambiguity defines Sedat Peker's place in Turkey's collective consciousness. He exists in a liminal space, neither fully gone nor entirely present, both a lingering voice and a fading echo. His uploads have slowed, the dramatic revelations less frequent, but each time he speaks, the audience still listens. The intervals between messages have only deepened the sense of unpredictability. Will he resurface tomorrow with another viral bombshell? Or will months pass in silence? On the streets of Istanbul, his name is still spoken in low tones. In political backrooms, his image remains part of strategic calculations, if not as an active threat, then as a reminder of what happens when a man with reach and memory decides to speak. Many younger followers, who first encountered him through social media, still view him as a figure who broke the unwritten rule that those who operate in the shadows must remain there. Many people still think that his story is winding down, that exile and time will erode his relevance. But Sedat has built his life on disproving assumptions. His network remains intact, if leaner. His public profile, though quieter, can flare to life in a matter of hours. And his understanding of timing, the patience to wait until conditions are most favorable, means the story may yet take turns no one anticipates. For now, ambiguity serves him well. He can live without the constant strain of confrontation, while still holding enough leverage to reinsert himself into the national conversation at will. This balance gives him freedom, and in his world, freedom is the rarest commodity. In interviews, when asked if he plans to return, Sedat offers the same enigmatic smile. "A man doesn't need to stand in a place to shape what happens there," he says. The line circulates online, half inspirational quote, half warning. The present may be uncertain, but uncertainty is a space where Sedat Peker has always thrived. Whether he steps back into the spotlight or lets the myth grow in his absence, his influence remains, woven into conversations, calculated moves, and the uneasy awareness that somewhere he is still watching. And now, as the streets of Istanbul quiet in our minds, let's slow the rhythm. Imagine the Bosphorus at night, its waters dark, the city lights scattered across the surface like fallen stars. Somewhere beyond the reach of those lights, a man sits in a quiet room, the hum of an air conditioner replacing the roar of crowds, his thoughts moving slower than they once did. In this softer space, the noise of politics fades. There are no cameras, no microphones, no coded messages sent into the world. Just the measured breath of someone who has learned, through decades of struggle, the value of stillness. The world outside might wonder when he will act again. But here, in this moment, there is no urgency. The teacup on the table has gone lukewarm. A phone rests nearby, silent for now, though it could change everything with a single vibration. He doesn't reach for it. Instead, He lets the quiet deepen, as if storing it for the days when quiet will be harder to find. The city will go on without him for a while longer, and he will let it. The tides of power will rise and fall, just as they always have. His name will be spoken in some rooms, forgotten in others. That is the way of things. For tonight, though, we leave him in that room, breathing evenly, eyes half closed, no moves left to make until he decides the game is ready to be played again. And perhaps, in that calm, there's a lesson for all of us, that sometimes the most powerful step is not forward or back, but simply to stand still until the moment is right.